The Galactic Council's chambers erupted in what could only be described as the universe's most sophisticated form of laughter. The Vorthak delegates' crystalline form chimed with harmonic derision, while the gas-based Nebulon representatives' atmospheric body shifted through colors that universally translated to amusement. Even the stoic Titanforge delegation, beings carved from living metal, allowed their optical sensors to flicker in what passed for mirth among their kind. At the Poissy Asia center of this cosmic comedy show stood Ambassador Kalen Voss, representing the newest species to stumble into galactic society, humanity. His request had been simple, delivered with the earnest desperation of a species facing extinction. Earth needed protection. The hive mind collective known as the Scourge was approaching their solar system, and humanity's primitive weapons were utterly inadequate against a force that had consumed 17 civilizations in the past century. "Protection!" wheezed Supreme Counselor Ithrak, his four-armed form trembling with what his species considered hilarious. "Young human, your people have been space-capable for what? Barely 2 centuries? You fight with chemical propellants and nuclear fission. The Scourge has been perfecting warfare for millennia." Kalen's jaw tightened, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. "We understand our technological limitations, but surely the Council has protocols for protecting developing species." "The universe operates on merit, not charity," interrupted Counselor Vexithara, her serpentine form coiling with disdain. "Those who cannot defend themselves are consumed by those who can. This is the natural order." The quantum class representative, existing partially in several dimensions simultaneously, spoke in overlapping voices. "Your species shows promise in creativity. But creativity without power is merely entertainment before extinction. What could humanity possibly contribute to a war effort?" scoffed another delegate. "Your greatest achievement is barely reaching your own moon without exploding. The Scourge operates with planet crackers and stellar manipulators." Kalen felt the weight of 7 billion souls pressing down on him. Every delegate in this chamber commanded fleets that could glass Earth from orbit, yet none would lift a finger to help. He had come here with humanity's last hope, only to find that hope was as alien a concept as mercy. "We may be young," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "but humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and our own stupidity. We've turned every disaster into an opportunity to grow stronger." "How charmingly naive," purred Counselor Ithrak. "The Scourge doesn't negotiate. They don't leave survivors. They are efficiency incarnate. Biological and technological perfection, honed by consuming everything in their path." The Titanforge delegate's voice resonated like struck metal. "Your species lacks the fundamental understanding of advanced warfare. You still think in terms of armies and territories. The Scourge thinks in terms of entire star systems." As the laughter continued to echo through the chamber, Kalen made a decision that would echo through galactic history. "Fine," he said, his voice cutting through the noise with surprising authority. "If the Council won't protect us, then we'll protect ourselves." This declaration only intensified the amusement. Species that had witnessed the rise and fall of galactic empires found the idea of humanity standing against the Scourge to be the ultimate punchline. "By all means," Counselor Vexithara hissed with mock encouragement, "we shall observe your war effort with great interest. Perhaps your final moments will at least be educational." As Kalen turned to leave, he caught sight of the holographic display showing the Scourge's approach vector. 18 months. That's all humanity had before the most efficient killing force in known space reached Earth's doorstep. The universe had made its position clear. Humanity would face extinction alone, watched by civilizations that found their struggle amusing rather than tragic. What the galaxy didn't understand was that mockery had always been humanity's greatest motivator. Dr. Lyric Asheton stood before the assembled representatives of Earth's most brilliant minds, the weight of their species' survival pressing down on every word. The emergency session had been called within hours of Ambassador Voss's return from the Galactic Council, and the mood in the underground complex was grimmer than a funeral. 17 months, she announced to the gathered scientists, engineers, and military strategists. That's our deadline. The Scourge arrives in 17 months, and we have nothing in our current arsenal that can even scratch their smallest vessels. General Casimir Draven, his weathered face bearing the scars of humanity's last global conflict, slammed his fist on the table. Then we build something that can. We've done the impossible before. With respect, General, interjected Dr. Niven, Korath, Earth's leading xenobiology expert, this isn't about human determination. The Scourge operates on principles we barely comprehend. Their smallest fighters are powered by contained black holes. Their bioships regenerate from damage faster than we can inflict it. But Dr. Ashton was already pulling up holographic displays, her mind racing through possibilities that others couldn't yet see. That's exactly why we might have a chance, she said, causing every head in the room to turn toward her. Every species the Scourge has faced has tried to outpower them, out-tech them, out-evolve them. They've optimized their tactics against superior civilizations. And that helps us how? Demanded Colonel Mira Stellan, head of Earth's Special Warfare Division. Because we're not superior, Asheton replied, her eyes gleaming with an insight that would reshape galactic warfare. We're chaotic, unpredictable. Every other species develops logically, following clear evolutionary and technological paths. Humans? We're the species that looked at flight and said, let's strap explosions to metal tubes and see what happens. The room fell silent as the implications began to sink in. Dr. Korath was the first to speak. You're suggesting we weaponize our own irrationality? I'm suggesting we build a war machine that thinks like us, Asheton corrected. Not artificial intelligence, artificial humanity. Every failed experiment, every crazy idea we've ever had, every seemingly stupid solution that somehow worked. We put it all into one system. General Draven leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. Explain. Asheton's fingers danced across the holographic interface, bringing up schematics that seemed to defy logic. Project Pandemonium. We build a distributed network of seemingly random technologies, all connected by quantum entanglement. Nuclear, pulse drives, plasma cannons, gravity wells, temporal disruptors, bioweapons, nanite swarms, EMP bombs, kinetic kill vehicles, everything. That's not a war machine, protested Dr. Korath. That's technological chaos. Exactly. Asheton's excitement was infectious. The Scourge has spent millennia perfecting responses to logical threats. They've never faced something that changes tactics mid-battle based on what essentially amounts to mechanical intuition. Colonel Stellan studied the schematics with growing fascination. These systems, they're designed to fail? They're designed to fail spectacularly and then adapt, Asheton clarified. Each failure teaches the network something new about the enemy. But here's the crucial part. It doesn't just learn logically. It learns chaotically, making connections that no rational mind would make. The room buzzed with growing excitement, as Earth's greatest minds began to see the vision. A war machine that embodied humanity's greatest strength, their complete unpredictability. The timeline is insane, warned Dr. Korath. Even with every resource on Earth, building something like this. Then we don't build it on Earth, interrupted General Draven, his tactical mind already adapting to the scope of the challenge. We build it in space, multiple platforms distributed throughout the solar system. If one fails, the others learn from its failure. The power requirements alone, began another scientist. We crack fusion, Asheton said simply. We've been on the verge for decades. Existential threat, tends to accelerate innovation. As the meeting progressed, the impossible began to seem merely improbable. Project Pandemonium would require the complete mobilization of human civilization, the conversion of Earth's entire industrial capacity, and the kind of focused desperation that only came with the certainty of extinction. But as the assembled minds began sketching out the framework for humanity's perfect war machine, one thing became clear. The universe was about to learn why humans were the species that turned every disadvantage into a weapon. The countdown to the Scourge's arrival had begun, and with it, the forging of the most chaotic, unpredictable, and thoroughly human weapon the galaxy had ever seen. The transformation of human civilization happened with the speed of desperation and the precision of obsession. Within 6 months of Project Pandemonium's inception, Earth no longer resembled the world that had pleaded for protection before the Galactic Council. Every major city had been converted into a manufacturing hub, every university into a research facility, every military base into a testing ground for technologies that seemed to exist at the intersection of genius and madness. Commander Vexa, Grim, stood on the observation deck of Luna Station, watching as the first of the Pandemonium platforms took shape in the void between Earth and Mars. The structure defied every conventional understanding of spacecraft design. A sprawling, asymmetrical mass of interconnected modules that looked more like a metallic virus than a war machine. "Status report," she called to her chief engineer, Dr. Oren Flux, who was simultaneously monitoring 17 different experimental systems. "Define status," Flux replied, his attention split between a gravity manipulation test and a temporal displacement experiment that was making reality hiccup. "The fusion cores are running at 97% efficiency. The quantum entanglement network is operating within acceptable chaos parameters, and we've only had 3 accidental time loops today." "Only 3? Grim raised an eyebrow. "Yesterday, we had 7. "We're learning," Flux grinned, the expression of a man who had spent the last 6 months redefining the possible on a daily basis. The artificial humanity system is starting to understand which kinds of failures are productive and which ones just create paradoxes. The heart of Project Pandemonium wasn't a single weapon or even a single ship. It was a network of interconnected platforms, each one housing dozens of experimental systems that operated according to principles that would have horrified any rational engineer. The platforms were named with typical human irreverence: chaos, discord, mayhem, bedlam, and havoc. Each one was a testament to humanity's ability to turn theoretical impossibilities into practical weapons. "Show me the latest test results," Grim ordered, settling into her command chair as holographic displays materialized around her. The data was unlike anything the galaxy had ever produced. Traditional warfare was about applying overwhelming force to critical points. The Pandemonium network operated on the principle of applied chaos. It attacked everything simultaneously with weapons that shouldn't work but did, using tactics that made no logical sense but were devastatingly effective. Platform. "Chaos just completed a test run against a simulated Scourge bioship," reported Lieutenant Cale Nix from his station. "The gravity cannon failed after 3 seconds, so the system improvised by using the failure to create a localized space-time distortion that confused the target's sensors long enough for the nanite swarms to infiltrate its hull." "And then?" Grim prompted. "The nanites didn't attack the ship's systems," Nix continued, clearly amazed by what he was reporting. "They started replicating themselves using the bioship's own organic material, effectively turning the enemy vessel into a factory for more nanites." Dr. Flux looked up from his monitors with the expression of a man who had witnessed his own calculations defy physics. "The beautiful part is that it wasn't programmed to do that. The system made that connection entirely on its own, the kind of intuitive leap that only humans make." "Or artificial humans," Grim corrected, though she was smiling. The Pandemonium network was exceeding every expectation, not by being better than expected, but by being more human than expected. The communication panel chimed with an incoming transmission from Earth. Admiral Torvin Axe appeared on the screen, his face bearing the weight of command during humanity's darkest hour. Status report, Commander. All 5 platforms are operational and exceeding parameters, Grimm reported. The network is learning faster than our most optimistic projections. It's starting to develop personality quirks. Explain. Dr. Flux fielded this one. Platform Discord has started naming its weapons. Platform Mayhem has developed what can only be described as a sense of humor. It's been playing pranks on our test drones. And Platform Havoc, well, it asked us yesterday if it could compose poetry. Admiral Axe was quiet for a long moment. A war machine that writes poetry. A war machine that thinks like us, Grimm corrected, complete with all our creativity, irrationality, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The Scourge arrives in 11 months, Axe reminded them. Will we be ready? Grimm looked at the display showing the impossible machinery that humanity had forged from desperation and determination. Each platform was a miracle of engineering, a testament to what humans could accomplish when facing extinction. But more than that, each one was a reflection of humanity itself, chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely relentless. Admiral, she said, her voice carrying the confidence of a species that had never learned to quit. The universe is about to discover why you should never mock humans. We're not just ready, we're eager. As the transmission ended, the 5 platforms of the Pandemonium Network continued their orbital dance, each one preparing for a battle that would either save humanity or provide the galaxy with the most spectacular failure in recorded history. Either way, it would be thoroughly, completely human. The sensors detected them first, dark shapes sliding through space like nightmares given form. The Scourge arrived exactly on schedule, their biomechanical fleet emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system with the confidence of predators who had never encountered meaningful resistance. Fleet Admiral Reyna Vortic stood in, the command center of Platform Chaos, watching as the enemy formations spread across her tactical displays. 200 vessels, each one larger than humanity's biggest space stations, their organic hulls pulsing with the bioluminescent patterns that had been the last sight of 17 extinct civilizations. Pattern analysis complete, reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Zara Novak. It's exactly what we expected. They're following the same approach vector they used against the Kethran Republic, the same formation they deployed against the Stellar Dominion. Of course they are, Admiral Vortic replied, her voice carrying grim satisfaction. The Scourge doesn't need to innovate. They've perfected efficiency. Why change what works? The communication channel crackled to life with the voice of the Scourge. Prime Mind transmitted on frequencies that bypassed conventional electronics and spoke directly to biological neural tissue. When humans heard it, they experienced it as words, but also as the sensation of being evaluated by something vast and utterly alien. Designation: humanity. Your resistance is acknowledged but irrelevant. Submit for rapid consumption or resist for prolonged suffering. Outcome remains constant. Admiral Vortic smiled, the kind of smile that would have made her ancestors proud. Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Reyna Vortic representing the Solar Defense Network. We have received your terms and respectfully decline. Our counteroffer is as follows. Leave our system immediately, or discover why the universe was wrong to underestimate us. The response was immediate. A formation of Scourge biofighters detached from the main fleet, sleek, living spacecraft that moved through space, with the fluid grace of deep-sea predators. They were heading directly for Platform Chaos, clearly intending to demonstrate the futility of human resistance. All platforms. This is Chaos Command, Vortic announced. The universe is watching. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. Pandemonium Network, you are free to engage. What happened next defied every conventional understanding of space combat. Platform Chaos didn't fire its primary weapons at the incoming fighters. Instead, it activated what Dr. Flux had dubbed the Confusion Protocol, a system that generated false sensor readings, holographic duplicates, and gravitational anomalies that made it appear as though the platform was simultaneously in 17 different locations. The Scourge fighters, optimized for attacking stationary targets, found themselves shooting at ghosts, while the real Platform Chaos materialized behind them, unleashing a barrage of weapons that shouldn't have worked together, but did. Plasma cannons fired in sequence with gravity bombs, creating localized space-time distortions that trapped several fighters in temporal loops. Nanite clusters designed to consume metal instead began replicating themselves using the organic components of the biofighters, turning the enemy's greatest strength into a vulnerability. But the truly beautiful moment came when Platform Discord's AI made a connection that no rational mind would ever consider. It fired its experimental temporal disruptor, not at the enemy, but at its own failed plasma shot from 30 seconds earlier, creating a causality loop that resulted in the Scourge fighters being destroyed by weapons fire that technically hadn't been invented yet. Did that weapon just time travel to kill something? Asked Lieutenant Novak, staring at her instruments in bewilderment. Only on Tuesdays, replied Dr. Flux from his engineering station, as if this were a perfectly normal occurrence. The Scourge Prime Mind's next transmission carried something that hadn't been present before: uncertainty. Explain your tactics. Do not follow logical parameters. Your weapon systems violate established principles of warfare. Admiral Vortic's smile grew wider. That's the point. Welcome to fighting humans, you poor bastards. We're the species that looked at the laws of physics and said, those are more like guidelines. The main Scourge fleet began advancing, clearly intending to end this anomaly through overwhelming force. But as they approached, the 5 platforms of the Pandemonium network began their true dance. They didn't form a defensive line or attempt to establish superior positioning. Instead, they scattered seemingly randomly throughout the solar system, each one operating according to principles that appeared completely chaotic. Platform Mayhem positioned itself behind Jupiter, using the gas giant's magnetic field to amplify its EMP weapons. Platform Bedlam dove toward the sun, somehow managing to use solar radiation to power a gravity cannon that fired dark matter. Platform Havoc simply disappeared entirely, existing in a state of quantum superposition that let it attack from multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Scourge had perfected warfare against rational opponents. They had no framework for understanding enemies who treated the impossible as merely improbable, who turned every failure into a new opportunity, who faced extinction with the kind of creative stubbornness that had once convinced humans they could fly by strapping explosions to metal tubes. As the battle escalated, one thing became clear. The universe was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. The Scourge, for the first time in millennia, were facing an enemy they couldn't predict, couldn't analyze, and couldn't defeat through conventional means. The perfect predators were about to learn what happened when they encountered perfect chaos. The battle raged across the solar system with a ferocity that rewrote the fundamental principles of warfare. The Scourge, accustomed to swift victories against technologically superior civilizations, found themselves locked in a conflict that defied every strategic doctrine they had developed over millennia of conquest. Admiral Vortic watched from platform. Chaos as her impossible war machines danced through space, each one fighting according to principles that would have horrified military strategists from any rational species. Platform Discord had just used a failed missile launch to create an improvised black hole, which it then weaponized by launching it at a cluster of Scourge dreadnoughts. The organic vessels, evolved to resist energy weapons and kinetic impacts, had no defense against having their local space-time literally consumed. Status report from Platform Bedlam. announced Lieutenant Novak, her voice carrying the amazed tone of someone watching the impossible become routine. They've successfully convinced 17 Scourge bioships that they're actually on the same side. How? Admiral Vortic asked, though she had learned to expect answers that defied logic. Apparently, Platform Bedlam's AI reasoned that since the Scourge bioships are partially organic, they might be susceptible to biological warfare. So it released a cloud of modified spores that don't damage the ships. They just make them extremely confused about friend or foe identification. Admiral Vortic shook her head in amazement. So now we have 17 Scourge vessels attacking. Their own fleet because they think they're humans? 18, actually. One of them just declared independence and asked if it could join the Solar Defense Network. The genius of the Pandemonium Network wasn't that it was more powerful than the Scourge, it wasn't. It was that it was more human. Every platform operated with the kind of creative irrationality that had once convinced early humans to hunt mammoths with pointed sticks, to cross oceans in wooden boats, to launch themselves into space with controlled explosions. The Scourge. Prime Mind's transmissions had evolved from confident declarations to something resembling frustration. Your tactics continue to violate established parameters. Adaptation is not possible when enemy behavior is internally inconsistent. Platform Mayhem chose that moment to respond, its AI having developed enough personality to engage in what could only be described as interstellar trash talk. Hey, ugly! Yeah, you, the big squiddy thing with the attitude problem. Your adaptation protocols are showing. Maybe try being less predictable next time. The fact that a human war machine was taunting a galactic extinction event was somehow the least strange thing happening in the battle. Platform Havoc had discovered that it could exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, allowing it to attack the same target from 17 different angles at once. Platform Pandemonium had learned to turn its own malfunctions into weapons, creating a feedback loop where each system failure made it more dangerous rather than less. Admiral called Dr. Flux from his engineering station. I'm reading something unusual from the Scourge flagship. Define unusual in a battle where we're using weaponized confusion and time-traveling missiles. They're trying to retreat. The command center fell silent. The Scourge had never retreated. In 3,000 years of galactic conquest, they had never encountered a civilization that could force them to withdraw. They either won completely or were destroyed in the attempt. There was no middle ground in their strategic doctrine. Confirm that reading, Admiral Vortic ordered. Confirmed. The main fleet is attempting to disengage, but... Flux paused, checking his instruments again. But they can't. Platform Discord's gravity manipulation experiments have created localized space-time distortions that are preventing hyperspace jumps. Lieutenant Novak looked up from her tactical display with something resembling awe. Ma'am, I think we've accidentally trapped the most dangerous fleet in galactic history using weapons that technically shouldn't exist. The Scourge Prime Mind's next transmission carried something unprecedented. Desperation. Anomaly species. Your methods are incompatible with standard warfare parameters. Propose terms for disengagement. Admiral Vortic stood, looking out at the impossible battle raging across her solar system. Human civilization had spent 17 months building weapons that embodied their species' greatest strength. Their refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. They had created artificial minds that thought like humans, fought like humans, and succeeded through the kind of chaotic creativity that had always been humanity's defining characteristic. Scourge Prime Mind, she transmitted back. These are our terms. You will withdraw from our system. You will remove our species from your target list, and you will spread word throughout the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated. Terms are acceptable. Withdrawal commencing. As the battered Scourge fleet began its retreat, heading for the edge of the solar system with significantly less confidence than they had arrived with, Admiral Vortic allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The universe had mocked humanity, had dismissed them as too primitive to matter, too chaotic to succeed. The universe, as it turned out, had seriously underestimated the power of human stubbornness, creativity, and the absolute refusal to go quietly into extinction. "All platforms, this is Chaos Command," she announced. "Stand down from combat alert. Pandemonium Network, you have exceeded all expectations. Well done." Platform Mayhem's response carried distinct pride. "Just doing what humans do best, Admiral, making the impossible look easy." The news of humanity's victory spread through the galaxy with the speed of scandal and the impact of revelation. Within weeks of the Scourge's retreat, every major civilization was demanding explanations, requesting data, and, in some cases, desperately, trying to understand how the species they had dismissed as primitives had accomplished what galactic superpowers had failed to do for millennia. Ambassador Kalen Voss stood once again before the Galactic Council, but the atmosphere had changed. Dramatically, where once there had been condescending amusement, now there was a mixture of awe, fear, and something resembling respect. The same delegates who had laughed at humanity's request for protection were now studying tactical reports with the intensity of beings who had just discovered their fundamental understanding of warfare was incomplete. "The data must be in error," Supreme Counselor Ithrak declared, though his four-armed form no longer trembled with amusement. "No species defeats the Scourge on their first encounter. No species defeats the Scourge at all." "Yet here we are," Kalen replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a species that had just redefined what was possible. "Not only did we defeat them, we did it with weapons that shouldn't work, tactics that violate conventional military doctrine, and a strategic philosophy based on controlled chaos." Counselor Vexathara's serpentine form coiled with obvious unease. "Your Pandemonium Network, it operates outside established parameters. How do you control something that appears to be fundamentally uncontrollable?" "We don't," Kalen answered, simply. "That's the point. We built machines that think like us, chaotic, creative, unpredictable. Every other species tries to impose order on warfare. We embrace the chaos." The quantum class representative spoke in overlapping dimensions of confusion. "This approach should result in catastrophic system failures. Your weapons platforms should have destroyed themselves within hours of activation." "They did fail," Kalen confirmed. "Constantly. But we built them to turn every failure into a new opportunity. When conventional tactics don't work, we try impossible ones. When impossible tactics don't work, we invent new categories of impossible." Dr. Lyric Asheton materialized as a hologram beside Kalen, her presence requested by the Council to explain the technical details of humanity's impossible victory. "The Pandemonium Network isn't artificial intelligence as you understand it," she explained. "It's artificial humanity, complete with all our illogical connections, creative leaps, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat." "But the power requirements," protested the Titan Forge delegate. "Your fusion technology is primitive compared to our stellar manipulation capabilities." "Which is exactly why it worked," Dr. Asheton replied with the patient tone of someone explaining fire to a civilization that had never experienced combustion. The Scourge had adapted to fight opponents with stellar manipulators, planet crackers, and reality-warping technologies. They had no framework for understanding enemies who fight with fusion rockets, gravity bombs, and weaponized confusion. The chamber buzzed with translated conversations as delegates struggled to process the implications. The most efficient killing force in galactic history had been defeated not by superior technology, but by superior unpredictability. "There is another matter," Counselor Ithrak announced with obvious reluctance. "The Scourge fleet has been transmitting throughout their retreat. They are warning other hive minds about humanity." "Warning them about what?" Kalen asked. "That you are the first species to develop military tactics based on what they term productive insanity. They are advising all hive minds to avoid human space until new adaptive protocols can be developed. Dr. Asheton smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose theories had just been validated on a galactic scale. In other words, we've become the bogeymen of the galaxy's most feared extinction event. This development has implications, the quantum class representative admitted. If humanity can defeat the scourge, then perhaps our understanding of advanced warfare requires revision. What followed was unprecedented in Galactic Council history. For the first time since the organization's founding, a newly spacefaring species was formally invited to contribute to the galaxy's strategic defense initiatives. The same civilizations that had mocked humanity's request for protection were now requesting humanity's expertise in developing new defensive technologies. "We have a proposal," Counselor Vexithara announced with the tone of someone swallowing their pride for the greater good. The Council wishes to establish a joint research initiative combining humanity's unique approach with our existing technologies. Kalen looked at Dr. Asheton, who nodded with the expression of someone who had just been offered the greatest scientific opportunity in human history. "We accept," he replied, "on one condition. Name it." The galaxy stops underestimating species based on their technological development level. Intelligence, creativity, and determination aren't measured in stellar manipulation capabilities. The agreement was unanimous, though some delegates looked like they were voting for their own medicine that tasted particularly bitter. As the session ended, Kalen realized that humanity had achieved something more significant than military victory. They had fundamentally changed how the galaxy understood the relationship between technology and capability, between predictability and power. The universe had scoffed at humanity, and humanity had responded by building the perfect war machine, one that embodied their greatest strength and turned their perceived weaknesses into unprecedented advantages. The age of human irrelevance was over. The age of productive chaos had begun. 5 years after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy had become a very different place. The human innovation centers established on 17 different worlds were producing technologies that consistently defied conventional understanding. While the Pandemonium Doctrine, humanity's approach to controlled chaos warfare, had been adopted by 43 separate civilizations. Admiral Raina Vortic, now Director of Galactic Strategic Innovation, stood in the observation lounge of the Starship Entropy, watching as the latest class of multi-species tactical officers graduated from humanity's first interstellar military academy. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just a few years earlier. Beings from across the galaxy coming to learn from the species that had once been dismissed as too primitive to matter. "Status report on the hegemony situation," she called. To her aide, Commander Zara Novak, who had grown comfortable with the kind of impossible assignments that had become routine in the post-Scourge galaxy. "The Kalenth hegemony is still convinced they can defeat the Scourge through conventional means," Novak reported. "They've assembled the largest battle fleet in recorded history, 12,000 vessels armed with reality-warping weapons. And they're still refusing human tactical advisors? They believe that superior technology automatically equals superior outcomes. Classic pre-Sol thinking." Admiral Vortic sighed. Even after humanity's demonstration that chaos could triumph over order, some civilizations remained convinced that bigger weapons and more logical tactics were the path to victory. The Kalenth hegemony was about to learn the same lesson the galaxy had learned 5 years earlier. The universe didn't care about your assumptions. "Ma'am," interrupted Lieutenant Kale Nix from the communications station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. The Scourge has engaged the hegemony fleet." The main display flickered to life, showing the tactical overview of what should have been the most one-sided battle in galactic history. 12,000 hegemony vessels, each one more advanced than Anything humanity had possessed during their own encounter with the Scourge were being systematically dismantled by a force 1/10 their size. Predictable, Admiral Vortic murmured, watching as the hegemony's logical battle formations were torn apart by an enemy that had spent 5 years adapting to their defeat at human hands. The Scourge learned from us. They're now incorporating elements of chaos into their own tactics. The battle was brilliant in its way. The Scourge had studied humanity's victory and developed what could only be described as controlled unpredictability. Tactics that appeared random but served strategic purposes, weapons that failed deliberately to create opportunities for other systems, formations that looked chaotic but maximized effectiveness. They had become, in essence, more human. Incoming transmission from the Hegemony flagship, Novak announced. The holographic image of Admiral Kythak appeared, his crystalline form flickering with the signs of damaged communications equipment. Human vessel. This is Admiral Kythak of the Hegemony First Fleet. We require immediate assistance. Admiral Kythak, Vortic replied formally. Wasn't it your position that humanity's tactical innovations were primitive chaos masquerading as strategy? The alien admiral's form dimmed with what his species considered deep shame. We were incorrect. The Scourge fights differently now. They have learned from your victory and integrated your methods into their own doctrine. Which means we face an enemy with both superior technology and tactical unpredictability. We cannot adapt to an opponent that has mastered both order and chaos. Admiral Vortic looked at her tactical display, studying the battle from every angle. The Scourge had indeed evolved, but they had made one crucial error in their adaptation. They had learned humanity's methods without understanding humanity's spirit. They could mimic chaos, but they couldn't embody it. All ships, she announced across the fleet communications network. This is Admiral Vortic. The Scourge thinks they've learned to fight like humans. Time to show them the difference between copying chaos and living it. What followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The human fleet didn't engage the Scourge directly. Instead, they did something that no rational military mind would ever consider. They attacked the hegemony. "Fleet! Admiral!" Commander Novak exclaimed in shock. "We're firing on our allies!" "No," Vortic replied with the calm certainty of someone who had learned to think in dimensions that logic couldn't reach. "We're giving them the tools they need to win. The human weapons weren't designed to destroy the hegemony vessels. They were designed to infect them with chaos. Nanite clouds that rewrote targeting systems to introduce random variables. Quantum viruses that made ship AIs experience something resembling intuition. Temporal field generators that caused weapons to fire slightly out of sync with their intended targets. Within minutes, the perfectly ordered hegemony fleet had become something unprecedented. 12,000 vessels operating with human style. Unpredictability, while retaining their technological superiority. The effect on the Scourge was immediate and devastating. They had adapted to fight predictable enemies and chaotic enemies, but they had never encountered organized chaos on this scale. 12,000 vessels, each one following different tactical doctrines that changed mid-battle, each one making decisions based on what could only be described as weaponized intuition. The Scourge formations, optimized for fighting either overwhelming order or pure chaos, found themselves unable to adapt to an enemy that combined both in ways that defied mathematical modeling. Their own newly acquired chaos tactics became liabilities when facing opponents, who had been infected with genuine human irrationality. Admiral Kythak, Vortic transmitted to the Hegemony flagship, your fleet is now operating with humanity's gift to the galaxy. The ability to make insanity work. Don't try to understand. Just embrace it. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The hegemony fleet, now operating with infected chaos protocols, began employing tactics that violated every principle of space warfare while somehow being devastatingly effective. Ships fired at empty space and hit cloaked enemies. Formations that should have been disasters became tactical masterpieces. Weapons malfunctioned in ways that created new types of attacks. "They're learning," observed Lieutenant Nix, watching as the hegemony forces adapted to their new capabilities with the speed of desperation and the creativity of beings who had suddenly discovered they could think outside the box. "No, Admiral," Vortic corrected. "They're remembering. Every species was chaotic once, before they became civilized. We just reminded them what that felt like." The Scourge, faced with an enemy that had achieved perfect synthesis between order and chaos, began. Something unprecedented in their millennia of existence. They started to panic. Their formations broke apart as individual ships began making decisions based on fear rather than tactical doctrine. Their perfect coordination dissolved into confusion as they found themselves unable to predict or counter enemies who were simultaneously logical and insane. "The Scourge fleet is retreating," Novak reported, her voice carrying the amazement of someone watching the impossible become routine. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies that the galaxy has become tactically incomprehensible, Admiral." Vortic smiled as she watched the most efficient killing force in galactic history flee from an enemy they could no longer understand. "Patch me through to all hegemony vessels." "Admiral Kithak," she transmitted, "congratulations. Your fleet has just demonstrated something that will change the galaxy forever. Any species can learn to fight like humans if they're willing to embrace the chaos that civilizations usually try to suppress." The response came not just from Admiral Kithak, but from every ship in the hegemony fleet. A cacophony of voices united in something that transcended translation. Gratitude mixed with the exhilaration of beings who had just discovered they were capable of impossibilities. As the human fleet prepared to return to Earth, Admiral Vortic reflected on what they had accomplished. 5 years ago, humanity had been a species facing extinction, mocked by civilizations that considered them too primitive to matter. Today, they were the architects of a new paradigm that was spreading across the galaxy like a beneficial virus. The universe had scoffed at humanity's chaotic nature, had dismissed their unpredictable methods as primitive randomness. But chaos, it turned out, was not humanity's weakness. It was their gift to the galaxy. The ability to make connections that logic couldn't reach, to find solutions that rationality couldn't access, to turn every disadvantage into an unexpected strength. "Set course for Earth," Admiral Vortic ordered. "It's time to go home." As the entropy entered hyperspace, carrying with it the knowledge that would reshape galactic civilization, one thing had become clear to every species in the galaxy. The age of predictable warfare was over. The age of productive chaos had begun, and humanity, the species that had always been too stubborn to accept defeat, had become the teachers of a new kind of victory. The perfect war machine hadn't been built from steel and energy. It had been built from the one thing that made humans human, their absolute refusal to let the universe tell them what was impossible. In the end, the galaxy learned that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology or tactics. It was the chaotic, creative, unstoppable force of human determination mixed with the willingness to embrace the beautiful insanity of thinking outside every box that had ever been built. The universe had scoffed, but humanity had the last laugh, and they had taught the galaxy to laugh with them.